This past winter, we drove the Polestar 4 with the Performance Pack option. You know the one with a bigger visual attitude. It's the spec you convince yourself you need because 544 horsepower apparently requires more theater. It does have the aesthetic drama, and it's happy to drive sideways on ice. This is the more pedestrian version of the Polestar 4. This one doesn't have the fancy gold Brembo brakes or the massaging seats, far less visual shouting. That should make it the compromised car, but it doesn't. I'm taking this one to Port Austin to the top of the thumb to answer the more useful question. Did Polestar make the better Polestar 4 by leaving out some of the expensive drama? .544 horsepower from two electric motors. There's one at the front, one at the rear, but the one number that counts is 506 pounds of torque from 0 RPM. In a lot of EVs with this kind of setup, that translates into violent acceleration. But with this Polestar 4, I find that it does something different. It delivers all of that torque, but it does it without trying to impress you. Acceleration is always immediate and complete, kind of like water pressure filling a hose. And acceleration might be the least impressive thing that this drivetrain does. Under light load, the front motor decouples entirely, so it's rear drive only. What that also means is that there's no parasitic drag from that front motor just sitting there spinning unpowered. And you can almost feel that transition if you're paying close attention. But I think the engineers behind this setup didn't care if anybody noticed. What they did care about was the range number, and it's 280 miles. This is a 5,200 pound crossover, and I think the math works. Most one-pedal driving setups tell you immediately whether the engineering team actually drives their cars in traffic. The one-pedal setup here is about as close to perfect as you can get, and I primarily drive it on one pedal all the time. I'm rarely touching the brake pedal. And that's because when you lift off the throttle, the regen is as close to normal deceleration as you'd expect in any other vehicle, and then it tapers off smoothly all the way to a stop. It's subtle, but the transition from regenerative braking to friction braking can be abrupt from time to time, but if you're actively involved in driving this Polestar 4, it's really not a thing. In my brief drive so far, I find that it's one of those things that I'm actively anticipating, but I think what's going to happen is that it will eventually become unconscious and just part of this Polestar 4's driving experience. Subscribers get notified when new episodes drop on this channel. Everyone else leaves it to the algorithm. If you want to know when our episodes hit YouTube, well, that's what the subscribe button does. This episode is powered by Joule. The Polestar 4 has 200 kilowatt fast charging architecture. The building behind me couldn't hand over 200 kilowatts without triggering a local utility crisis. The traditional solution involves waiting years for a transformer and ruining the business case before a single car ever plugs in. Instead of a massive grid upgrade, the Joule hub behind me trickles a polite 50 kilowatts from the existing service 24 hours a day. When I plug this Polestar 4 in, it gets a DC fast charge. Out here, battery buffering is the only hardware reality that gets a vehicle charged in under 30 minutes. The electrical service doesn't notice, the grid is protected. Joule systems are Build America, Buy America compliant. Visit JoulePower.com. Steering has 3 modes, light, standard, and firm, and the reality is only one of these modes belongs in this car, which is standard, because I don't need any artificial assistance, and I don't need any artificial heft. Unlike the Polestar 4 with the Performance Pack that we drove in the winter at Macan, the gold calipers are missing here, but what that also means is that this Polestar 4 doesn't look like it's trying to audition for a Nürburgring lap. There aren't a lot of curvy roads up here in the thumb, but the steering loads properly, allows you to track through a corner perfectly, and at the end of the day, it's honest about what it does. There's not a lot of feel or feedback that comes through the steering wheel, but thankfully there's a little bit of information that comes through the chassis so you can understand what's going on at all 4 contact patches. Polestar calls the dampers continuously controlled damping, and no matter what they call them, they're doing some serious work here. In standard mode, as we're in now, the ride's compliant and well controlled controlled and you just generally forget about what's going on with the dampers. Switch to firm, however, and the Polestar does one interesting thing. If you're paying attention, you notice a slight reduction in body roll. On the other hand, with the road surfaces in Metro Detroit, with the broken pavement and uneven seams, well, they seem to have the ability to turn this entire cabin into a percussion section. The dampers have the ability to control the body as well as isolate passengers, but at this curb weight, they can only do one of those things at a time. This has 6.5 inches of ground clearance, but it also has a battery in the floor, and what that means is it feels less like a tall crossover and more like a sports sedan. Weight distribution feels relatively even front to rear, but the reality is mass. At any point in the corner entry, mid-corner, corner exit, when you're putting down power, this car does a fantastic job managing its weight. And if you're really aggressive with your corner exits, you can feel some subtle intervention with the traction and stability control systems. Keep this planted before an understeer incident develops. And when I had it on ice at Makse, that was the best trick of this car. It was predictable enough that you could explore the limit and beyond, and it was heavy enough that you always knew where the limit was. The differences in the road surfaces between Metro Detroit all the way up the thumb through to Port Austin tells me everything I need to know about Polestar's suspension philosophy. The streets and the freeways around the city are incredibly rough, and they just generally want to disagree with the tires. Out here on the smooth 2-lane roads of the thumb, this is nothing but composed. And out here, expansion joints are just a single thump instead of a double, and frost heaves are just a compression and no secondary body motion. The 21-inch wheels of this tester might be a tax on ride quality because the base model gets 20s, and that additional sidewall height might result in a little bit more compliance. If you'd like to support the channel beyond just watching, well, the merch store link is here, and your support there means more time for us to produce episodes like this and less time worrying about industry access. No pressure, just an option. The rear window does not exist. Yes, this is a tired trope. I do not want to belabor this fact. Polestar replaced it by an 8.9-inch LCD screen fed by a 2.5 megapixel HDR camera. The result is the most divisive design decision in the segment by a wide margin. And if you've watched other Polestar 4 reviews, you know exactly what I'm talking about. In reality, though, this image is clearer than what I'd see through any glass, and you actually get a wider field of view than I've experienced in any other car. You can't argue that there are some advantages to this tech-driven solution, but on the other hand, you do lose something by not having a traditional mirror and a traditional piece of glass to look through. And this is the thing, my driving habits have been developed over decades, and what I lose from these systems is a little bit of spatial awareness and the cues you would get from traditional reflections in the mirror. Initially, it takes a bit of adjustment to get accustomed to it, but after, 50 miles or so, it became second nature. I think the seating position puts you a little lower than the Polestar 3, so it's a little closer to a sedan than a crossover. Forward visibility is excellent. Low cowl height, relatively thin A-pillars, decent outboard mirrors, and rearward visibility, well, we're not going to talk about that anymore. Seriously, though, adjust your outboard mirrors properly, and the combination of all three means that blind spots aren't real. There's a minimalist design philosophy that extends all throughout this Polestar 4, as with other Polestars, and what you've got here from a seating position standpoint is power seat adjustments in the traditional place on the left side of the seat. However, if you want to adjust the steering wheel position, well, those adjustments are built into the screen. It's not something you want to do on the move, but the reality is once you have it all set up and your seating position saved, you're not going to change it. The seat itself is wonderfully supportive and comfortable. There's an extendable thigh support cushion, and I'm perfectly comfortable here even on this long drive. Plus, there's just enough support to keep you in place in the three corners we found on the way up to Port Austin. They call this upholstery microtech. It's supposed to be a synthetic leather. Yes, we know Polestar is focused on sustainability, but the net is that this upholstery actually feels expensive and premium. And just in case your rear seat passengers wanted to know about this upholstery, well, the front seat backs have a printed label. This particular tester has the Harman Kardon sound system, and in this EV, it is just brilliant. And since I came from an internal combustion engine vehicle, jumping into this with a few less decibels and similar driving conditions, I'm actually able to hear some notes and some recordings I hadn't heard before. Android Automotive runs this infotainment system on Snapdragon, and it's fast enough and quite easy to use. The only bit of friction is when you want to use the climate controls. What that means to drivers like you and me is that anytime you want to adjust the temperature, you have to take your eyes off the road. And no, it's not just Polestar that's guilty of baking in climate controls into the touchscreen. It seems to be an industry-wide obsession. The heads-up display, however, gives me all the information I'm looking for: speed, advanced driver assist status, and if I'm using the native navigation system, the turn-by-turn directions end up on the windscreen. If this episode gave you more information than a brochure or a press release, hit like. It tells YouTube to share this video with other people like you interested in an episode like this. Takes just a second. $63,000 buys you 544 horsepower, a chassis that actually communicates with you, and a badge in your driveway that most of your neighbors will confuse with a kitchen appliance. It's confident and coherent, and Polestar's asking the market to recognize it without help. The market doesn't work that way. As an object, it's stunning. The proportions work without any effort, surfacing's restrained, and the missing rear window earns it a silhouette nothing else in the segment matches. As a car, it does everything a good car should. It's got a compliant ride, and it steers into corners with intent. Its 5,200 pound curb weight gets managed with discipline, but the gap is in the telling. BMW buyers know the story. Tesla buyers are the story. Polestar buyers need a reason to start the conversation, and the car's best argument is the drive itself, which means that the people who would love it the most should drive it first. This Polestar 4 is the best car that most people will never test drive, and the reason doesn't have to do with the engineering. And yes, this particular tester came without the performance pack and the fancy gold Brembos, but somewhere between Bad Axe and Port Austin, I completely forgot about it. And yes, there's no rear window, but there's no apology either. Polestar committed to the bit, and that I gotta respect. And on this long drive, there wasn't a single moment where this car showed me something that would have resulted in a major complaint. And that should be the headline, but it won't, because nobody writes headlines about competence. That's the Polestar 4. Subscribe if you want to see more of these. Don't if you don't. Comments are open if you disagree. And if you want to help fund more of these, well, the merch store link is here. See you on the next one.